everybody. Mike Levin, November 27th, 2022, Sunday at around 11 p.m. And this weekend I've spent a fair amount of time responding to Microsoft's big changes lately. Rocks my world, and it's funny and interesting that things that are so big to me are hardly even a blip in the news cycle. And I had spent some considerable effort getting ahead of the curve, making sure that I could use Linux containers on Windows as my main development platform. And that required all these tiny little things falling into place, including hacks going around Microsoft's withholding of various things, namely native Linux graphics on Windows 10, first in general and then on Windows 10 because it was developed on Windows 11, and then Systemd, again on Windows 10 because it was developed on Windows 11. And it was very recently, that was like September, October, November, like 2 months later, it went from the insider track, the developer, insider program for Microsoft for developers, to everyone, including Windows 10 users. And they accomplished this, it appears, by moving the whole package, the Windows subsystem for Linux package that makes this possible, in addition to the underlying NT stuff that makes it possible, but the .exe, such as it were, was moved into the Windows Store. It's now in the Microsoft Windows Store. So if you go over there and you search on a Windows subsystem for Linux, and you have to do it long form, you can't just type WSL, you'll see it there in the store, which means they're going to be able to push out upgrades automatically, without having to type WSL space minus update all the time. They'll be able to push out improvements the same way as anything in web stores are managed by the store. They make updates available. If you have it set to auto update, bippity boppity boo, you're on the latest stuff. So the whole, it's weird. It's weird. That means, I guess it's weird on the operating system side too. I'm still kind of getting used to the fact that you set things to auto update and you forget about it, because after a while you have so many apps, it's that way now on mobile and desktop, that if you had to deliberately say, okay, go ahead and update every time there's an update for every app, that's all you'd be doing all the time. Update. So moving targets. All the more reason to stick with the containerization approach. With WSL now being able to host, say, Jupyter Notebook with native Linux graphics, it's very tempting. Run it directly on WSL. However, I am very much trying to get familiar with, to get into my muscle memory, to make it part of my standard set of tools, LXD, and the LXC command that gets installed with it. So you only ever see the LXC command after it's been installed initially and set up, which is an LXD command. But once it's installed, the whole interface is through a program called LXC. And it's kind of like Docker. It's like getting to know Docker, right? Those commands that, start a Docker image on a Docker server. It's kind of the same thing. But it's better for a developer who wants full run of the Linux operating system and who wants to take advantage of, repos, software repositories, which is itself in transition. The Snap Store. Yes. So I based all my work recently on Ubuntu 18.04, at least as far as the Linux containers, because it worked smoothly. The wizard for installing LXD host worked on 18.04, hitting enter all the way through it. It did not at the time I was working on this on 20.04. It does today. So everything's coming together, all the stars are aligning, and my weekend has been spent mostly dumping 18.04, moving to 20.04 as both the host and the container system, and to switch my VCX SRV X Windows server, to switch it over to the native one, to what's included now with Windows Subsystem for Linux. It's still an X server, I'm learning, that gets mounted inside /temp .x11-unix /x0 is the file socket. So there's different ways for, Linux graphics to be drawn onto the screen, but one of the cute and interesting ones is that the way everything is a file in Unix, right? Linux is that way too, because Linux was more or less derived from Unix. It might have been black boxed, but it still is the Unix philosophy that has gone into it, and it was a clone of Unix. So all these principles that everything is a file, right? So you want to be able to draw stuff to the screen in graphics, make a mount point in the file system. So that happens to be a certain location now under WSL, and I guess other systems. As I was researching it, it's a fairly common convention. Arch does it, and you just drop this file size. It looks like a file, but it's not. It's like the way devices are underneath the dev directory in Unix, and processes are underneath the proc directory. It's really nuts. Linux makes everything look like a nail and gives you a hammer, and it's very nice. It gives a clear mental framework for many of the things you may want to do in computers in general. I mean, this is one of the various things that drove Unix popularity and in turn Linux popularity. So I've been fiddling with the switches, and when I'm done, everything should be exactly like it was before. My script should do exactly the same things as it did before, except with fewer lines of code, because I'll be taking advantage of the Microsoft stuff that's there. So was it worth it for me to do it the slightly more hackish way earlier? Yeah, because now I'm completely familiar with the process. I fleshed out the product, such as it were, and I'll be there before anyone else with server build scripts on Windows 10 and 11 is what we're talking about. You run this server build script, and before you know it, you have a generic Linux container hosting services being proxied through to your Windows desktop in such ways as being able to reach, Jupyter Notebook through localhost 8888. That's the kind of trick. Like, it's punching holes from a system that's, fairly locked down on your system to your Windows system. It's like two systems talking to each other. It's very much like two systems talking to each other. So when you have that, and there's security issues, you often hear of port forwarding or proxying, or variations on punching a hole that only this one thing can get through and be interacted with. Exposing APIs is what we're saying. And I'm just about there. I'm zeroing in on it. There seems to be some conditions where after you activate System D, because it's optional, you have to turn it on with a /etc/WSL.conf conf file, right? So it's not standard Linux, right? It's customized Linux, this WSL stuff, which is another one of those reasons to move to the containers. I want it to be completely generic Linux once you're really interacting with it on a daily basis. And just some of this scaffolding work is provided by WSL, and then it fades into the background, and you effectively are intended to not worry about the fact that there's Windows on there at all, to the point where the very containers that you are working on could be moved into the cloud or other native Linux hosts or whatever, you know. It's a real shell game. And I'm loving it. Can't wait to get this last mile and hit this thing home and produce some good videos where I can stop talking about tooling and start releasing all the potential that has been built up in here. Well, thanks for joining me. Talk to you soon, and don't forget to subscribe.